We're all wondering about infrastructure, the infrastructure package, and the big debate about that. So I'd like to ask your indulgence. I know this is a long lunch, to take a little bit of time with me so I can tell you my own infrastructure fairy tale. My case for you this lunch, there's something there. My case for you this lunch is that all you really need to do to understand our infrastructure problem now and what our infrastructure spending will do and not do is to walk through another infrastructure cycle, that of 1935-36. So I'm going to artificially compress history for a few minutes and tell you, make the case that 1936, that election year, was the most significant election year in the past 100 years. And the infrastructure spending in that campaign did a couple things. It would collect a record number of votes, but it also did something that I think of all audiences in America, this audience understands. It tipped the balance of federalism. Before 1936, the states and the towns were bigger than Washington. After 1936, it was Washington that was bigger. This was a spending campaign that shaped our politics and did so by promising Americans a certain thing, that Washington is there to reward special groups. Okay, so it all seemed warranted, but they did lock into place the habits that we see again today. If we think edifice, if as a country we think edifice, structure is the answer to economic trouble, it's because of 36. If we think, I'm just missing one page, sorry. If we think, sorry about that. If we think that spending is the answer, it's because of 36. It's all very important, which is why I'm grateful to ALEC, everyone, for having me. Can you see my picture? Yep. It's not quite the history we learned of the 1930s, but it is important, so I'm going to go through it with you. If you want to tell the story of this election, this big infrastructure cycle, you talk about a country in two men. The country, the Dow is down 2/3 from its famous high of 381. But even in the early 30s, well into the Depression, this country belonged to the states. All of federal spending in 1930 is 3% of GDP. There are a few numbers in this, not too many. The amount, even in 1930, is $2.7 billion for federal spending. Washington outlays move up. It's a high for peacetime. But even a couple years into the Depression, a couple years in, they get to 5% of GDP for Washington, and states and local governments are 10%. It's to the states and the local governments that many still turn for recovery. Washington in these days is scared of big business. There's no big tax redistribution at this time. The income tax, we say, is still a class tax, not a mass tax. Liberalism is a good word, not a bad word, and it stands for the individual. American workers don't view themselves as at war through their unions with the rest of the country. Our unions are gentler. They're more like trade and guild unions. So the men in my story, I'll show you first, is Harold Ickes, a reforming lawyer from Illinois, originally a Republican, the father of the Democrat we know today who advised Mrs. Clinton, and of course, FDR. So who's Roosevelt? He trains as a lawyer. He's a Navy president. He's somebody who thinks in terms of laws and fleets and divisions, not small businesses, not customers. Or to put it another way, this is a man who is all about ships, not shops. He's sort of an opposite of Margaret Thatcher. And in his 1932 campaign, when he first is running for president, FDR talks about someone he calls the forgotten man and helping that man. He means, he says, the man at the bottom of the pyramid. His speechwriter puts that phrase into this speech and tells his sister that he doesn't know where he got it. The forgotten man, what's that? Maybe it's from sports, you know, strange metaphor. But the phrase does have an American provenance, a noble American provenance. It comes from a national bestseller in the 19th century, in the 1880s, called The Forgotten Man. That forgotten man was a different forgotten man, one described by a Yale professor named William Graham Sumner. See. Sumner has a little algebra to explain who his forgotten man is. He says, okay, and this is what we all think about every day. A wants to help X. That's the philanthropic impulse, the charitable impulse. Okay. And B wants to help X. That's also the impulse that we know so well. Comes the problem when A and B get together and pass a law that coerces C into funding their perhaps good, but perhaps dubious project for X. C is the forgotten man, the man who pays, the man who prays, the man who is never thought of. So they're in opposition, these two forgotten men. Is it the guy who gets, or is it the guy who subsidizes, the guy who gives? And they all knew this phrase, and they thought about it the entire 30s. I'm the forgotten man. I know the forgotten man. Today, our forgotten man is the man who paid his mortgage and sees the person next door not paying it. While he sympathizes with that person, sure, he doesn't want to subsidize through taxes the bailout of the second person, right? Very similar moment. In any case, so you go several years into the presidency. Roosevelt is having trouble, especially with econ. He meets with the economist from the UK, John Maynard Keynes, at the urging of Francis Perkins, his labor secretary. But he doesn't really like the economist. He tells Francis that the economist, all he did was give him numbers. And FDR didn't like numbers. So New Deal is having mixed results by the numbers. They counted unemployment a little differently then, but now economists, including Richard Vedder, from whom you're going to hear this afternoon, have gone back and quantified the unemployment at about the time Roosevelt is thinking of re-election, let's say May 1935, a year and a half before. And the unemployment in May 1935 was 20.1%, which is hardly a number you want to launch a campaign on. There's a right-wing think tank writing a 1,000-page report about how Roosevelt's New Deal isn't doing very well, and the think tank concludes that on the whole, the centerpiece of FDR's New Deal, the thing he's most proud of, the National Recovery Administration, is retarding recovery. And the name of that think tank, by the way, is the Brookings Institution. Where's the Dow? The Dow's nowhere near where it was even in 1930, Hoover time. It's in the, right? So around about this point in his campaign, in his thinking, FDR makes a decision. He's going to give up on helping the general economy. Maybe the economy will take care of itself. It's trending better sometimes. He's going to refine his definition of the forgotten man. The forgotten man will be that poor figure still, the homeless man, the man at the bottom, and there are so many of them with that unemployment. But it will also be defined constituency groups. He's going to connect with those groups, the senior citizen, the farmer, labor, and the man at the bottom of the pyramid of whom he originally spoke will be the pretext for making that connection. You've heard it before. No crisis should go unwasted, right? A crisis is a terrible thing to waste. He's going to spend to make the project work. He's going to, and I want you to note the verb because it's a little bit different from the verbs we use now about legislation. Roosevelt tells the press, and it's reported in the New York Times, that he's going to blast some bills out of committee, to blast. He's going to demonstrate what he means by bold, persistent experimentation, one of his important phrases. He's going to bring national happiness by using a classic American antidepressant, real estate. He's going to use buildings as advertisements, and he's going to build our way to recovery. So the symbol that he picks to describe his effort is an old office we don't talk too much about anymore, the Public Works Administration, which is run by that man I showed you before, Ickes. PWA sits in Washington, but it funds infrastructure, building, bridges, structures in towns and villages. What Roosevelt grasps is that the PWA has the power to change attitudes toward Washington. Ickes spent the 20s attacking big utility giants, private giants in Chicago as corrupt. Now he's going to make PWA regional offices and show how you have clean business, government businesses. And his offices go to the towns and offer them a combo of grants or loans to build local structures. If a town needs a school, dam, power plant, the PWA will supply the cash.